Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Hello there, you're watching the press preview. Our first look at what's on the front pages as they come in. So over the next half an hour, we're going to be talking through the Sunday papers with journalist and author Christina Peston and Liam Booth-Smith, Chief Executive at Localis, a not-for-profit think tank. So good evening to both of you. So let's take a look then at the front pages. And news that Sir Alex Ferguson has undergone emergency surgery is featuring across the papers. Sir Alex Ferguson, fighting for life is the headline there on the Daily Star on Sunday. And The Sun on Sunday goes with a similar headline. The Sunday Times reports on the achievements of Sir Alex as Britain's most successful football manager and his legacy at Manchester United, though their main story there is devoted to knife crime. The Sunday Mirror calls Alex Ferguson a legend who is fighting for his life. The Observer also mentions Alex Ferguson on its front page, and it also has a report that aides to Donald Trump hired an Israeli intelligence firm to dig up dirt on the Obama administration during the Iranian nuclear talks. It's Brexit on the front page of the Sunday Telegraph, with a report that cabinet figures are threatening an open revolt if Theresa May steamrolls their objections to the customs deal. And the Sunday Express has the first pictures of the new royal baby, Prince Louis. So look, lots to talk about there with Christina Peston and Liam Booth-Smith. And the story that we've learnt about this evening, that Sir Alex Ferguson has had emergency surgery on a brain hemorrhage tonight and is now in intensive care, has made a lot of the front pages, even though the news came quite late. You've picked out The Sun on Sunday to illustrate this, and it's fairly typical of some of the headlines that we're seeing in the Sunday papers. Fergie fights for life, and a huge amount of goodwill towards him being expressed in the papers tonight.
Yeah, I'll probably jump in on this one if that's OK, because I'm a football fan and all that. But he's more than just a great and successful football manager. He's a cultural icon. Earlier in the evening, Christina, you made this point about him being someone now that international business leaders look to. I mean, this guy's so much more than just the former manager of Manchester United. He sort of, he changed the skyline of a city, in Manchester. So much success and regeneration around that place is associated with a time at which that football club was regenerating itself, becoming more successful. So it's also worth pointing out that Manchester United released the information which said that the surgery had gone well, but he needed to have quite an intensive period of recuperation. So I desperately hope he pulls through OK and is, for his family, really.
Well, yes, and that sentiment has been reflected not only in the newspapers but also across social media. Players from other teams, other clubs, all sorts of people from all walks of life wishing him well and hoping he has a speedy recovery.
I think it's a real reflection of the character of the man, actually, that he has survived the cruel scrutiny that today's public figures now have. I mean, nobody gets away with anything anymore. Any tiny error is, amplified on social media. So the fact that he is still held in such incredibly high esteem is a sign, I think, of what an extraordinary man he is. And there was one of the pieces I read earlier talked about his love and loyalty for his wife. Well, actually, how many people in football stay with their wife of 30, 40 years, whatever it is? I think he is an extraordinary man, and in particular in football, where there are many temptations to behave not with great integrity. This is a guy who has done so and maintained, as you said, the respect not just of the people that he has managed, but of other teams as well. And given what an incredibly tribal thing football is, that really is quite a vote of confidence.
And I'm sure we all add our wishes as well that he makes a speedy recovery. Any kind of developments on that, we will, of course, bring you to you when we hear them. And in fact, the news of Sir Alex Ferguson, we did have some editions of the papers that came in before that news broke, and some stories are following on from the local elections were actually knocked off the front page to make space for this. But you found a story inside the papers, the Sunday Express, page 7, which focuses on Jeremy Corbyn, and they link it to the local elections in that he perhaps didn't make the breakthrough in some areas because of concerns amongst voters about anti-Semitism and the party's dealing with it.
Well, I think that what has emerged in relation to the Labour Party and anti-Semitism has been an absolute disgrace. I think it can only have sickened the heart of any British person, actually, that something that we thought, you know, we have laboured under the apparent misapprehension that we are a relatively tolerant country, though even to use the word tolerant seems to be an affront. Why you should have to tolerate Jews or any other racial or other group is beyond me. But it has been, the degree of ugliness in the Labour Party has been absolutely shocking. And I'm afraid that Corbyn's record over this has been disgraceful. He has not acknowledged the depth of the problem, and he hasn't acted over it properly. And it looks as though the not very impressive results, particularly in Barnet, are a reflection of that. Now, I'm personally pleased that Labour didn't do better in these results, because I think that Corbyn is the worst thing that has happened to the Labour Party for many, many years. And I personally can never vote Labour while he is its leader. But I'm very, very sad over the reason for it. And I hope they act more now.
But, I mean, Andrew Gwynn, I know that after the results did admit that the party had to rebuild trust with the Jewish community, that the party is kind of acknowledging that there is an issue that has to be addressed.
Well, it keeps acknowledging there's an issue that needs to be addressed. Anti-Semitism seems to me, anyway, to be a cancer pretty close to the heart of the Labour Party. And you have a few options when you have a cancer. You can ignore it. You can go down a pretty aggressive medical route and have the thing cut out. Or you can choose homeopathy. And I think Corbyn, once again, is choosing... You know, the concern here is that he's going to choose the homeopathic remedy, which is sort of, we'll pay lip service to it. And toleration is the right word here. The idea that a perfectly integrated and valued part of kind of British, the fabric of British social life, the Jewish community, the fact that the idea that this needs to be tolerated, that those people need to be tolerated, seems utterly absurd to me. It's, I mean, this is kind of the Corbyn failure writ large, which is that a tolerant society isn't one where all views are equal. It's one where all views get an equal enough hearing to decide whether they're worth tolerating. And Corbyn seems not to understand that.
OK, and we are going to move on, but I'm going to just refer to the photograph, because it's got an extraordinary stance of a squirrel, and they were comparing it to some of the photographs of Sajid Javid and some of the other Tory leaders or people in prominent positions.
I have to say, this is my favourite story, not just of the night, but of the week. This is the squirrel doing the power stance which Sajid Javid took outside Downing Street when he was made Home Secretary. And it's based, I think, I may be wrong about this, on a TED talk by someone called Amy Cuddy, who talks about the importance of, you know, doing this, feeling your power and, you know, feeling the testosterone surge within you. But as I said before, this is something you're meant to do privately, not on the steps of Downing Street.
But also, I think I did actually read on Twitter that a Press Association photographer said that actually in Sajid Javid's case, there are other examples of people doing this prayer stance. Sajid Javid's case, it was a question of the photographer saying to him, "Can you just step to the left so that we can see the Home Office sign?"
See.
So it may be
okay, that may be
anyway, but we still needed to talk about the squirrel. Let's move on to the Sunday Times now, because their main story has taken your interest, and it talks about knife crime, which has been in the headlines because Donald Trump's referred to knife crime in London, hasn't he? But this is talking about an epidemic that's hit the Shire, as they say.
So it starts in London with multiple incidents of knife crime and deaths from knife crime this year. This story is suggesting that actually that's now spreading out from the capital and into Shire, England. And it's suggesting that it's driven by city gangs who want to deal drugs and are needing to break into new markets. So they're going out into places outside of London, into market towns and other rural communities, and basically attempting to set up business in those areas. And the numbers are quite staggering. I mean, we're talking potentially in some cases over 100% rises in incidents of knife crime. So it's I
suppose we don't know from what base that comes, but it's still worrying.
Well, it is. Well, I mean, what they're saying here, I mean, knife crime incidents in Hertfordshire are up 150% from 229 incidents in a year. So, I mean, what you're talking about to kind of, you know, it's 573 incidences of knife crime last year. That, to me, doesn't seem to be a small number.
I think this is a contagion, actually, and I think it's heartbreaking. I think amongst a certain demographic, there is something like a war going on in our streets. in particular parts of the inner city of London, but also clearly elsewhere as well. Where I live, it's on the A10, and it was actually the outside of my block. It was on the news on Thursday night, and I was thinking, why is it on the news? And it turned out that my road is one of the most dangerous roads in the country. Now, I'm a middle-class white woman, so I'm very unlikely to be caught up in any of this, but if you are a young black or mixed-race boy, that doesn't apply. And I was with a friend earlier this week who used to live round the corner, and he does come from that kind of background and ended up with a spell in a Young Offenders Institute himself. And he was pointing out to me, he said, oh, that's a gang, that's a gang, that's a gang. If you are in that world, you see it all around you. And it's just the degree, for example, that knife crime, but also acid, all of these things are taking off. They are like an epidemic that is spreading. And it's very hard to know what the answer is. I suspect that the public health approach that has been tried in Glasgow is worth trying, but we have to try, and we have to really take this seriously, because it's a tragedy for the young people involved.
Well, I think fear is the thing that this stuff breeds on. So, what we talked about, what's the baseline of these incidents? How many actually are there? In London, we're talking, 38 in terms of deaths. So in my mind, it's kind of the truth still remains that the vast majority of us won't experience this, but we'll all be fearful of it and scared of it. And you might find this a bit contentious because we've not really talked about this before. But I think if I was a young person in London today, from a pretty disadvantaged background, living in one of those areas with that sort of threat over me, you know what? Maybe I might consider actually carrying a knife if I felt that's the only way of protecting myself. Obviously, now I can see that, but at the time, if I think back, I'm not judging these people for doing it, because if it's the only way that I can feel safe walking down the street, I don't blame people for doing that. No,
exactly. And by the way, you don't actually have all... I mean, people from very comfortable homes always say, oh, but it's a moral choice. And it's like, well, you try growing up in that environment. My friend was telling me that he took on the school bully when he's 11, in his first year at secondary school. The headmaster actually said, this guy is no longer the school bully. From that day on, for the rest of his time at school, he was challenged to fight by all the fighters in the school. He had no choice but to fight. And you get caught up in that. And honestly, your degree of, I don't think I'll do this. Well, actually, if you walk into another postcode and you're going to be murdered, well...
You have a choice.
Yeah.
So, and a very complicated issue to try and tackle. We're going to take a look at the front page of The Observer now, because they've got some allegations concerning President Trump and the Iran arms deal. So what are they saying here?
Do you want to jump in this one?
Go ahead.
Well, I'll go at it then. Well, this is really all about that it's come to light that Donald Trump has hired, or there's alleged he hired, a team of spies to engage in a form of sort of dirty ops, dirty tricks type activity, digging information, hoping to find a bit of dirt on some of the advisors that worked for Barack Obama at the time when the Iran nuclear deal was negotiated. This is important for a couple of reasons. The first is that in a few days, Donald Trump's going to have to decide whether he signs off on a continuation of the Iran nuclear deal or puts it to one side. It's important for another reason, which is that there's a concern around the argument Trump makes against Iran is that they don't act in good faith. This is now bringing to light again, the question of Donald Trump's ability to act in good faith too, and what sort of conversations and negotiations that he and Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, have been having over the time that that Trump's been in office.
So yes, so if this is true, how worrying is it, do you think, Christina?
pretty worrying, except that unfortunately our shock levels, we have become almost unshockable, but actually this is an incredibly serious allegation to be dirty tricks against people involved in this. Personal dirty tricks, not just, is this a good policy, is this a bad policy? That is, that would be, in any other president, it would be an unbelievably enormous scandal, just the allegations. But because there are allegations, very, very shocking allegations pretty much every day, we're kind of beyond shocking. This week we had Rudy Giuliani asserting suddenly that Donald Trump had paid off Stormy Daniels, when before he had claimed that he knew nothing about it. So clearly he has lied. And this happens.
Although now Donald Trump says that perhaps Rudy Giuliani is new to the job, and it's all still a little bit
well,
cloudy
every single. I mean, essentially, what I find, one of the things I find incredibly depressing is that these super intelligent people assembled around him, and goodness only knows what it's like to be his press secretary, and his legal team are making all these incredibly complicated manoeuvres every single day simply to keep up with his latest lies. And the fact that the most powerful man in the world consistently lies and may well have done things like this, the kind of dirty tricks campaign talked about here, is just unbelievably depressing. And, you know, we can only pray that this is Donald Trump's last term and that he doesn't wreak too much more damage in his remaining years. But, of course, we can't guarantee that. OK, let's whiz on. We've only got a couple of minutes. I'm going to talk about pushy parents and holidays, and the two apparently can go together.
Well, they certainly can do, can't they? Or should they, is the more important question here. So this story is all about how a private company is essentially sort of managed to find a way of offering very pushy, tragic parents who don't feel their kids should have holidays to sort of take them away while their parents live in absolute luxury and sort of wonderful resorts, all-inclusive, while their kids are sort of shoveled away into sort of rooms where they can learn and be put through the paces on subjects so that they can sort of pass their exams with better results. And in principle, one thinks, OK, that's lovely, you know, you're trying to invest in your kid's future, but it is a holiday, and I think it's
children as young as 9
sad.
spending 3 hours every morning brushing up on English, maths, science and exam techniques.
So depressing, but also who has £6 grand to spend for a holiday? My God, these people must be earning an absolute fortune. I find, I'm not a parent, but I do find this whole sort of helicopter parenting thing incredibly depressing. I mean, I don't think my parents ever asked me whether I'd done my homework or what I had to do. I mean, they just didn't take that kind of interest. And we somehow, you know, got through our school and, you know, passed a few exams, most of us. Whereas now it seems that parents are kind of doing their children's homework and monitoring their every move.
It's probably because they didn't have to tell you, Christine. I'm sure you were...
But
so
obviously I was a very, very swotty child, but even so...
Talking of parenting, we're going to leap ahead and just show you some pictures of the royal baby, because they are on a number of the front pages. These ones are actually inside the Express, page 4, and we've only got about 20 seconds to coo over it. But let's do it. Why not? Because it's rather sweet. It'll come in a minute, I promise.
Yeah.
There's the front page of the Express.
Very sweet baby, very sweet baby. And the Express goes very big on the fact that little Louis is apparently wearing an outfit, shock horror, that Charlotte was spotted wearing before. Imagine wearing an outfit twice. I mean, what has the world come to?
Yeah, it's the foundation of good family life, aren't they?
And on that note, we must leave it because we are out of time. But Liam and Christina, very good to see you. Thank you.
Now to the papers. As ever, the front pages. That very sad Alex Ferguson news arrived late. And one of the big questions today is how radically did editors tear up their papers and remake them. There's the front of the Sunday Mirror. Man U legend Fergie fights for life. The Sun is the most dramatic of all of them. Fergie fights for life again there. And the Mail has not got that story on the front page. It's got a story about Sajid Javid's uncles and a visa scandal. A lot more to be talking about there. The Sunday Times, knife crime epidemic hits the Shires. They know where their readers are. And one of the many papers with Prince Louis on the front page, pictures released by the Palace yesterday, and again Prince Louis on the front page of the Sunday Telegraph. But a big Brexit story. Brexiteers threaten May with open revolts, and menacing phrases there, but of course from anonymous Brexiteers as ever. And finally, The Observer. You were hearing about that Trump and Iran story, a really interesting dirty trick story The Observer's got. Very interesting there. So we're going to start, of course, with Alex Ferguson. Kay.
Yeah, we are. Very good morning to you, Andrew. Thank
Good
you
morning.
for having me along. My first time on the show. While we were all out yesterday in the sunshine enjoying the first flush of spring, Alex Ferguson's family were gathered around his bedside. He was rushed to hospital at 9 o'clock yesterday morning. As you said, it's quite early for a lot of the papers, the story, but late, I should say. But there's 6 pages in the Sun. They have certainly done their readers proud on the back page as well. But let me just show you the front page. There you go. Fergie fights for life. He's been put in an induced coma They don't quite know yet, or we certainly don't know what has happened. He is in a very serious condition. Lots of people have been tweeting their support, as you can imagine. I don't know if I can just get the iPad out and pop it here so that you can see it, including Ozil, many of the other players as well. I don't know where it's gone, so we'll just ignore that. But people like Wayne Rooney has said, you know, good luck, boss. We've got our thoughts with you at this incredibly difficult time. He is, without question, I think, probably, you said you didn't know a lot about football. He is, without question,
he knows nothing about
the
football.
most successful football manager ever. He won the treble in 1999, which is when he was actually knighted as well. His wife, Kathy, and Alex, I've met many times before. He's an incredibly charming man.
I've been lucky enough to meet him as well, and he's a very, very brave guy with a huge amount of gumption and drive, which he's going to need over the next few weeks, I would imagine, because assuming that all has gone well, he'll have weeks and weeks and weeks of being monitored very closely. Fantastic physiotherapy, which is something that he's always imposed on his own footballers. He's now going to have to do it himself. And if he's got the courage and the drive, which I'm sure he has to do it, he can make a very, very good recovery these days.
Yeah,
but he's speaking from experience,
I'm speaking from experience,
He's such an interesting character because he's a cult, not just beyond sport, he is this icon, and whether you're in business or whether you're in politics, he is held up as the model of leadership that you aspire to.
He's just extraordinary. And the thing is, one of the things we love about him is he's not like so many footballers. He actually loves his wife. He hasn't cheated on his wife.
He's still with his wife.
He's still with his wife. And, you know, he's like another generation, isn't he?
Absolutely.
Let me just read this tweet that I can't find on the iPad, but it is in many of the papers as well. The procedure has gone very well, says Manchester United, but he does need a period of intense care to recover. So there is some cause for optimism there. Yeah,
that doesn't sound too bad, actually. Very well is good. Amanda, let's move on to politics.
Right, on to politics.
This very interesting splash in the Sunday Telegraph. This is a long-running argument in Cabinet, increasingly on the front pages of the papers too.
No, of course was huge pressure after the meeting in the Cabinet this week. Theresa May is, you know, torn between, you know, rock and a hard place, but the hardest place are the Brexiteers who are saying no customs union, no deal, no third way, because that's what they're talking about now. And this again, it's talking about, you know, a hybrid proposal. It's talking about a maximum facilitation plan.
The jargon is impenetrable.
What does that mean? What does that actually mean?
All you have to know is what they are saying. The guys from, and I'm not going to name any of the people that I speak to, but obviously in the Cabinet they say, no customs union. Start and end of the story. But, you know, we've got all of these machinations, which I think are going to go on for...
I think with some of the Tory rebels, particularly, I mean, in the Lords, they think they have enough rebels, but in the Commons, people like Anna Soubry and Nicky Morgan have been quite restrained about crossing the line and voting with Labour, let's say, to defeat the government. But on this customs union, it's such a big issue. I think the Conservatives would face... I think she has a high chance of facing defeat on this.
We're told that the Chief Whip has told Theresa May that she can't win this vote in the House of Commons at the moment. It might have to be delayed.
No, I'm sure that's true. That's why this battle is so fierce at the moment, and that's why you've got all these briefings. And from the conversations I have with people in the Cabinet, this is coming from the top of
and the backbenchers as well. I interviewed Jacob Rees-Mogg at the weekend for my programme on Sky, and he...
Don't you love him?
I went with a preconceived idea of what he was going to be like, and he was incredibly
charming. Can I just say, he is like something that Time Team have dug up.
I said
he's so old-fashioned.
Yeah, I mean, he's often referred to as the Minister for the 18th century, and he said, I'm certainly not that modern. So, you know, he had a good one-liner for everything, but he left me in no doubt that if Theresa May does not fulfil her promises, he is likely to stab her in the front as well as the back.
But Kate, is this not an empty threat in the end? Because if Theresa May is forced out in some kind of cabinet coup, what then happens to Brexit? I mean, the whole thing could collapse at that point.
Andrew, but it's so... we've never had a situation like this before. You've got members who have fought their entire political career in the Tory party to get out of Europe. You know, you can't underestimate how strongly they feel about this and how people are prepared to actually, you know, put their careers on the line to stop her.
But I think the same
But
is
if
true
not her,
on the
then
other on the other side as well. What's so interesting is, I mean, look, the Labour Party's got big issues with this as well, but for Conservative Party, Europe has dominated. It's been the battle at the heart of the Conservative Party. It has brought down Conservative prime ministers, and who knows where this customs union thing is going to take us.
I was going to try to explain the two options on the table.
Do.
We've only got several hours.
No, sorry.
I don't think I'll get on to that later on. We'll get on to that later on. Let's keep moving.
Before you go on to Alicia, there's a fantastic cartoon in the Telegraph today.
Telegraph.
Because you're going to talk about the local elections.
Yeah.
It's just great. I just want someone to take them away. It says a little old lady, and there are two bins, one with Corbyn and one with Theresa May.
But 'twas ever thus, isn't it? I mean, that's the view with politics.
I feel that could be Brenda from Bristol, that woman there, basically. Yeah, so I picked out a story from The Observer doing a roundup of the local elections. Now, I mean, I would have liked Labour to have done better outside London, but I think some of the coverage writing off Jeremy Corbyn, saying it's all over for Labour, is absolute nonsense. I just want to remind people that local elections are very, very different from general elections. A general election, you get more visibility of the issues, and the policy issues come to the fore, and of course the leaders get a lot more attention, and young people come out to vote at the general election. And I think what we saw from this snapshot on Thursday night was that Britain is in political deadlock still. Neither party would get an overall majority.
On these results, am I not right in saying that Labour would be the largest party in Parliament if they were replicated in a general election?
Correct. That was the John Curtis extrapolation.
But are local elections not a little bit like by-elections in that people see it as an opportunity to give whoever's in power a bloody nose, and actually they won't necessarily vote in the same way when it comes to a general election?
And I think this local set of local elections were quite interesting as well. There were lots of local issues. So, for example, in Barnet, the anti-Semitism scandal was huge. Yeah. And Labour, I'm afraid, correctly lost that council because of anti-Semitism. But another case I just want to highlight, in Pendle, the Conservatives gained a council because of a very nasty thing. They reinstated a councillor who made a disgusting racist joke, which frankly would have put the BNP to shame.
She was sharing it, but it is unbearably bad. It's the kind of thing that cannot even be alluded to in general terms on family television
Absolutely.
programmes.
And I think, you know, we have got to tackle racism and anti-Semitism in all walks of public life across all different parties. So I just wanted to make the point that I think all the predictions that it's game over for Corbyn are premature. Just remember, in the 2017 general election campaign, Corbyn went into that election 24 points behind, and everybody wrote him off, and he did a lot better. So I think it's wrong to
It's all about
right.
mobilising the young vote, isn't it?
One of the points of this paper review is to remind people of all the stories that are not actually in the TV headlines but are still very important. And Kay, the front page of the Sunday Times has a knife. We've been talking about knife crime in London. Now it seems that the knife crime epidemic.
On this one, I can't read the small print.
Spreads well beyond London.
Yeah, and we heard what Trump said, didn't we, about a London hospital being like a war zone. He was certainly talking about what a doctor had said, but he replicated that in a speech. But it would transpire that apparently it's not the cities that we need to worry about, and you are more likely to be a victim of a knife attack in Bedfordshire than you are on Merseyside, which to me seems almost unbelievable. Why is that? Apparently it's because the drug barons are trying to find new markets in the shires.
Yeah.
Kay, you're quite good at this kind of stuff on live television. You're relatively fluent and pretty good. I read that you have done more live television, apart from your gong, congratulations.
Thank you.
Apart from the gong, you have done more live television than any other woman in Britain or the world.
On Earth.
I've presented more live telly than anyone else in the world. I've done more than 1 million minutes of live telly. Yeah.
And what is your conclusion from more than 1 million minutes of live television? We'd love to know.
Without question, to date, is the epitome of my career.
Correct answer.
This is the high point. This is the high point.
Fantastic. Let's move on to Meghan, shall we?
Meghan Markle. Yeah.
Because she's not yet given, we're talking about live television, she has not yet given the live TV interview, but she's going to give a live TV interview with Oprah Winfrey.
Her mother is.
Yeah, her mother.
Oprah Winfrey has nabbed her in her palatial home for the whole weekend. Got 6 hours of interviews on tape. Talking about how all the abuse that she suffered, Meghan suffered since it was announced that she was marrying.
Her mother suffered a lot of abuse when
she
they got married.
Yes.
When she first married Meghan's father, she was often seen by many of the people in this mostly white neighbourhood that they lived in, as she was seen as the maid. So they couldn't comprehend that a woman of colour could possibly have this child. So she
well,
must be the
made
base.
no more.
Well, exactly. And I think one of the things that's so amazing about this union is, look, the British royal family is at the pinnacle of the class system. They are the absolute representation of the elite of the elite. And to have a person of colour join that, I think, is an incredibly important and powerful moment for this country.
Isn't it fantastic that her dad's going to walk her down the aisle?
Yeah.
And I don't think he's been out of his little hut in wherever he lives now. He's a bit of a recluse, but he's been, you know,
although I did feel sorry for him because he's gone out to buy his wedding suit and they've been getting pictures of him getting measured up.
And he's quite big, isn't he? He's quite big. Let's talk about all those baby pictures. This is a kind of British ritual. The official baby pictures are released and everybody goes coo.
Yeah, he is a very beautiful baby. He is 8.5 pounds. He's a very healthy weight, shall we say?
Yeah.
But this is a hand-me-down outfit from Charlotte when she, her first ever photo call. So Mum's popped him in the same. Well, these are pictures that are taken by Kate.
Austerity coming to. But I love the fact that Kay was literally. In fact, I think Kate had to hold off giving birth until Kay was back in the country. I wanted Kay to be cutting the umbilical cord. I thought that actually would have been a fitting moment for the royal birth.
That is a very, very attractive moment to end this fascinating paper review on. Thanks to all of you.
On Friday, she was celebrating the local election results, even though in many important parts of England, her party actually went backwards, which felt the mirror image of his victory celebrations after he lost last year's general election. You see, expectations are everything in politics, and her torrid few weeks made it seem plausible that Labour would win control of London councils that have been Tory almost forever. Didn't happen. So, long forgotten is that just a few days ago, her Home Secretary, Amber Rudd, resigned in the most humiliating of circumstances over the appalling treatment of Windrush migrants. And who now remembers that on Wednesday, her replacement, Sajid Javid, stymied the Prime Minister's desperate attempt to at last secure ministerial backing for a post-Brexit customs plan. It's all so strong and stable again for Theresa May. In it, or perhaps not. What do you think, Allegra Screeny?
Well, Pesto, it's not particularly good for either party leader. I'm afraid the Brexit warriors have not taken the bank holiday off to sit in the paddling pool or go to the tip like me. Whilst most of you are blissed out in the sun, the newspapers show that the different camps are still at each other's throats. So here we have this story that is probably about to get pretty serious. Brexiteers threatening Theresa May with open revolt. They're really unhappy about the shape of her proposed compromise on Europe, more worried, I think, than they have ever been. And then on the other side of the coin, we have Jeremy Corbyn on the Independent front page, but also the Observer here, getting it in the neck, this time from Labour peers. They are accusing Jeremy Corbyn of Brexit cowardice. They would like to be allowed to vote for essentially a bit of a softer Brexit. Both party leaders this weekend coming in for a grilling from their own side, probably partly because neither party did convincingly well in Thursday's local elections, or enough to silence their critics. So we thought we would look back through time at all of the elections and see how local election results led on to general election results. So this is pretty complicated, but as always, I will try to hold your hand and talk you through it. What you need to know is down here are all of the years, and for each year we have an election result. How high they go above this line, in a nutshell, is how well they are doing in that election that year. So, the Labour Party in the 1990s in the very obvious red. This is 1997 or thereabouts, maybe I'm a bit too far along, but nonetheless, this is where 1997 happened, and you can see a whole slew of pretty good local election or election results. Same is true for David Cameron. Yes, I know, he didn't actually win a decisive majority, but nonetheless, he got into number 10. And again, he's having a drumbeat of pretty good election results in the run-up. This lack of anything going on is actually what happened on Thursday night. Both parties, 35%, so they are absolutely like that. No one able to get a decisive advantage. That is why, for the Labour Party, there's no red above the line. That's pretty bad if you see that back there, when they went into government, they had a brilliant set of results in the run-up. Robert.
So I'm thrilled to be joined by Grant Shapps and Wes Streeting. Wes, just picking up on what Allegra was showing, if the normal rules apply, then Labour should have polled nationally in those locals a greater increment over the Tories to be confident of winning the next election. So in that sense, these were disappointing results for you.
Well, in the end, I think in the sense that for both the Labour Party and the Conservative Party, you can't take from these results that either of us would have a majority after the next general election, which is what you would want. Having said that, you know, there were pretty solid results for Labour in a number of places. In London, we had the best results since 1971. Even where we fell short in boroughs like Wandsworth, it was by the tightest of margins. I think the Conservatives suffered disappointments in places like Plymouth, but also Trafford in the north. So, you know, if these were replicated at a general election, we would be the largest party. Is that where we want to be? No, we want to do better. Should we be humble, particularly in boroughs like Barnet? Of course. I think it's interesting that, you know, certainly the Conservative Party chairman has been lauding this as great results for the Conservatives. I think when voters send a message to your party, as they have done now at the local elections this year, the general election last year, that they trust neither of our party with majority, I think by all means celebrate the success, thank all of our activists for working hard, but also have some humility that there is still more work to do to win over voters in, you know, across the country if either of us want to have a majority after the next general election, which clearly we do.
Grant, I mean, a few weeks ago, you and your colleagues were fearing that these results would be much worse than they turned out to be. Does that mean that it is now plausible, in your view, that Theresa May could continue leader of your party up until, or through the next election?
Yeah, so, I mean, what's really interesting, Wes is absolutely right that neither party really surged ahead one way or the other, but the Tories fundamentally absolutely won the expectation management game. I mean, that was the big win on Thursday night.
Expectation management is not the same thing as winning a general election or indeed winning. So you get a hit in terms of the media saying things are better than they thought, or we thought, as it were. Yeah. But it doesn't mean you can be remotely confident of winning. So what I'm trying to press you on is, what does this mean for Theresa May?
Yeah, well, look, I'd say this. Obviously, we had that botched general election, then we had a pretty uninspiring conference, and colleagues were sort of fed up. But actually, Theresa May's made changes in Downing Street, in CCHQ, and the reason I mentioned the expectation management in CCHQ is you saw something much closer to a sort of professional campaign where they were actually trying to you know, fit the message and manage the expectations for the election, which meant that coming out of this election, it does feel like a success. And actually, I mean, I think a lot of people thought the seats would go, all the councils would go in London, for example, outside London. It was positive for most part. So, yeah, I think the expectation management leads into more, and I think that having sorted out
sorry to press you on this.
Yeah.
So, you know, your colleagues have consistently been telling me that after Brexit, she will go. Is that still the consensus among Tory MPs?
No, I think that's in doubt. I think actually she has made those changes to Downing Street. Sort of, colleagues weren't being listened to. This was the problem. After that election and after the conference, the general election and the conference, colleagues weren't being listened to, which led to a point where colleagues sort of said, look, we need to go and have a conversation with them. Described as a coup, but in fact was only ever sort of a conversation that colleagues wanted to have. Downing Street, up until that point, weren't allowing people in to have that conversation. They've changed that around, and now you've got a situation where, you know, MPs, Conservative MPs, are in Downing Street all the time. They're talking to the Prime Minister all the time. The Prime Minister's changed her team, changed the approach. CCHQ, Central Office, has now put itself back together into campaigning terms, which is what we saw at this set of local elections. And your question is, does that therefore secure the position? Yes, I think to quite an extent it has settled colleagues because they feel like there's a plan in place.
So very briefly, unfortunately, this has got to be a sort of yes or no answer because, although we will have more time later, I've got to go and talk to my next guest. Have you, therefore, yourself withdrawn that letter calling for her to go, which you put into the
actually, I've never
committee?
put a letter in, so there's no letter to withdraw. But I think, to answer your question, where Downing Street brings colleagues in and listens to colleagues, then people feel a lot more confident that they're part of the plan.
So you think those letters have been withdrawn?
Well, I didn't have a letter in.
What about your colleagues, though? Because you were in touch with colleagues.
I was in touch with colleagues, but again, because the whole thing was described as being a coup, it wasn't in fact a coup, it was people who wanted to have a conversation. Now, as far as I know, those colleagues weren't putting letters in, they were just keen to have a conversation.
Well, let's have a chat about what's making the headlines this morning with David Cameron's former Director of Communications, Craig Oliver, the journalist and author Rachel Shabby, and the Director of Open Europe, Henry Newman. Thanks all for being here on this sunny day, dragging you away from the park, I'm sure. Let's talk about the local elections first, the story of the week. The Prime Minister has written in The Sun on Sunday, hasn't she? Headline, Labour still hasn't learned the lessons of its past failures. Craig Oliver, what do you make of the Conservatives' performance?
Well, I was just going to row back a little bit to looking at Colin Rallings and Michael Thrasher, who are academics who've really analysed this. And I thought that the thing that they've reached, the conclusion they've reached, is that they're more notable for what didn't happen than what did actually happen. And they've got some graphs here showing, you know, if it was a national election, 37% Conservative, 36% Labour. If that was translated into the Commons, 296 seats for the Conservatives, 270 for Labour. What it shows is a kind of gridlock or stasis in politics at the moment where nobody's really breaking through, nobody's really winning over the arguments. And as you say, the Prime Minister's written a piece in The Sun on Sunday, and it's a very, very valiant attempt to present that the Conservatives actually won the local elections. It's a very good go at that. And then she starts ticking some really interesting boxes. She starts talking about things that she hasn't done for a while. So the economy, which during David Cameron's time was very much front and centre of absolutely everything we did, is back. So is housing, so is health. And you have to get right to the very, very end of the article before Europe is mentioned. And they talk about the customs union here. But interestingly, The Sun isn't interested in the stuff on the economy, housing, health. What they say is that they're delighted that she's saying that we're going to leave the customs union. They plan to hold her to it. And they conclude their editorial, the voters demand an uncompromising trade and customs deal. They will accept nothing else. I'm not sure I agree with the logic of that, but it's fascinating how obsessed the political class is with the customs union at the moment.
But is there an argument, though, that the Conservatives did well in leave areas? So actually the message on Brexit is making a difference. What would you say?
I think it's definitely true. If you look at the article in The Observer, they quote Curtis, the respected opinion pollster, and he's saying that clearly her vote is sort of held up in leave areas, and if she betrays that, she risks a big fracture of the party. And we can divide the results probably quite nicely between London and the rest of the country. And in London, obviously, the Conservatives didn't have a huge setback, but they didn't do particularly well either. And that's a much more worrying long-term trend for the Tories if they seem to sort of be out of step with opinion in the metropolitan capital, even if they're managing to retain opinions in the heartland. But I think in London we also saw, quite interestingly, a pushback from Momentum, which Momentum didn't make the breakthroughs that they'd perhaps been expected to make in areas like Haringey. They were defeated by the Liberal Democrats. And I saw in my local patch, Camden, how Momentum and the local Labour Party were campaigning completely separately, not together, standing almost different candidates in different wards, and there was hardly any love between the two sides. So that's a kind of interesting trend for the future, perhaps.
Do you agree with that assessment?
No, not remotely. I mean, I think that's the sort of reaction you get from people who have understood that, look, Momentum has changed the game on the ground, that much is clear. In every place that there were Momentum campaigns, the Labour vote went up, the seats went up. That's just a fact. And I think that the Conservatives really don't know what to do with this ground game that Momentum has and that the Labour Party has with its, 550,000 members, the largest party in Europe. It is able to campaign on the ground. It is able to engage young people, people who normally don't vote. All kinds of different people are now coming into politics not just to vote, but to get involved, to campaign, to become councillors. The game has completely shifted. And when Theresa May says Labour hasn't learned the lessons of the past, the Conservatives seem completely oblivious to what is going on the ground now. The game is changing. If I were her, I would not be going to Wandsworth to celebrate the fact that the Tories held on to a flagship council, which they've had for 3 decades, that they held on to it by 80 votes. I wouldn't be celebrating that. I'd be desperately worried.
But the fact is that, look, clearly the Conservatives do need to do more to increase their membership and to actually get more activists on the ground. That's absolutely true. But Labour didn't make the breakthroughs either. I think Craig's analysis of this as pretty much a sort of stalemate, a stasis, was accurate. So
two losers.
If Jeremy Corbyn really was the new centrist and was about to sort of ride this huge wave of popularity, then we should have seen gains in London councils, and that's what Labour's been able to
I would just be very careful here, because The results are the results, and there's absolutely no way, if you were a Labour strategist, having said what Keir Starmer said a couple of months ago, that you would be happy with these results. Having said that, about the Conservative...
They all are happy with the results,
well, they can't be, because the expectation...
And yet they are.
Well,
are you happy
seriously?
Absolutely, yeah.
Not disappointed a bit?
Listen, I mean, we all wanted to see the Conservatives suffer more losses. Of course we did. You know, I think a lot of people in the country would have wanted to see the Conservatives take more of a hammering in these local elections. I'm not denying that, but I also think that there are a couple of things going on. First of all, what you said is absolutely right about politics being quite polarised at the moment. There are two big blocs, so that's one thing. And then the other thing is that if you look at local elections, you know, historically they have a lower turnout, and they have a much lower turnout amongst exactly the kind of people who are likely to vote Labour. So both those things combine, the increased voter share that Labour got and the increased number of seats that Labour won, means that the Labour Party is actually quite encouraged by the results.
I think you can make those assertions, but the results are the results. And if you take
I'm
2017...
making them on the basis of the results.
But what I was going to try and move it on to is what I'm slightly worried about hearing in Conservative circles is this idea that people were doing well in Leave areas, therefore we should be even harder on Brexit. You could look at these results and say, actually, the Conservative Party did disappointingly in metropolitan Liberal areas. And what David Cameron was able to do was build a coalition between Metropolitan Liberals and Shire Tories. And there is a worry that that coalition is defrayed. We saw what happened in 2017, and we saw it again today. So this idea that actually what everybody needs is more Brexit seems to me to be a very worrying analysis for the Conservative Party.
Well, maybe you should have a word with some of the people who've been speaking to the Sunday Telegraph this morning. Brexiteers threaten May with open revolt if she steamrolls her objections to her favourite plans for a customs deal. What's happening in the Conservative Party? It looks like they're just ripping themselves apart. Yeah.
There's obviously a very sizable debate going on about the future relationship with Europe, and that debate isn't settled. I think part of the problem from all of this is that Prime Minister has taken far too long to explain what her plan is. She said she wants to leave the customs union. We still don't know she hasn't made a basic decision as to whether we have the so-called maximum facilitation option, where we use technology and other options to smooth things out, or a partnership. The Cabinet discussed this, the inner Cabinet, last week, and they decisively rejected the partnership. And now it seems that Number 10 is proposing putting the same option back on the table. And I think that's a big mistake, and it risks, and they were seeing this on the cover of the Telegraph, risks a big rupture with the Conservative Party, but also rupture within the government.
Now, just before we run out of time, I'm very keen to talk about the big story of the week, of course, which is the power stance. Now, we saw the new Home Secretary doing this move, of course, earlier this week. And what is happening here now? Is Craig Oliver, maybe you can let us into the secret, is this something that you advise
I'm not taking responsibility for this.
But because he's not the first Conservative to have this slightly bizarre
Way back in that, you know, when the Conservative Party was in opposition, some advice was given to Conservative politicians to do a stance that's strong. And I think quite often they get excited in the moment and actually think we need to be even stronger in this. Actually, there's been a tweet by one of the photographers who said he wasn't really trying to do this pose, he was just moving. What I do remember from when we were in Number 10 was that there was a meme that was on Twitter, which was basically using the pose as an A and putting it in the middle of a word that can't be used on Sunday morning television.
If you follow politics closely, and of course you do, because why else would you be watching this programme, you can't have missed the new Home Secretary allegedly pulling something called the power pose this week. Sajid Javid was appearing in front of the cameras in his first day in the new job, and it spawned a lot of commentary. Sajid Javid and the strange science behind the power poses, said The Guardian. When's it OK to do a power pose, asked the BBC. Sajid Javid adopts awkward Tory wide-standing stance, said the Mirror, while The Sun said the craze was sweeping the country on polling day as voters and activists joined in with the bizarre Tory power pose. Well, without wanting to spoil the fun, we've been looking back at the footage of his appearance, and it looks to us like he was actually just taking a step to the side. Have a look at the footage. And there he is, being asked by the photographers to move to one side. And it's that image of him mid-step that spawned a lot of collar inches and imitators. We don't think he can actually be accused of pulling a power pose, in this instance at least. So, did we all fall for a bit of fake news, Tom?
I think we all fell for an excellent photograph in the time-honoured traditions of Fleet Street that sells newspapers. Oh. Now, Sajid Javid, I think the BBC have clearly exposed a scandal of national importance this morning.
Exactly.
So well done you. The only caveat I'd put on in defence of the great art of the Fleet Street photographer is that Sajid was probably a little bit naive to open his legs up, albeit for a fraction of a second, to give the photographers that moment, which and who wouldn't have exploited if you were there?
Well, good advice to all of us then the next time we appear in front of the camera.
So it was very embarrassing.
Do you think Jeremy Corbyn should be taking some tips from
No,
this?
absolutely not. I mean, it's really weird that they all do this. David Cameron has adopted this stance, George Osborne, Theresa May, they've all stood like this. Somebody has obviously told them to. And of course, it's one of the very many things that makes the Conservatives look insincere and out of touch.
Although, if it is...
That is a real stretch. That is a good try.
Do you see how I did that?
If it is a real... if the photographer's right, though, that this is just because he's trying to be helpful and moving out the way of the photographers, I have to admit feeling a slight degree of sympathy for everyone caught in this rather embarrassing position.
First today, voters heading to the polls would normally be the biggest story of any political week. But we live in interesting times. So while activists and MPs geared up to crisscross England, knocking on doors in a final effort to get out the vote, there was still plenty to unfold back in Westminster. And just a quick warning, this film does contain flashing images. Last weekend, Amber Rudd was on the ropes.
Do you believe that you've misled Parliament?
And on Sunday night, she finally threw in the towel. She resigned, not over the Windrush scandal, but for having inadvertently misled MPs over whether targets for deporting illegal immigrants actually existed. A government that has lost 4 cabinet ministers in 6 months might seem a little unsteady, but Transport Secretary Chris Grayling didn't seem too bothered.
This is a government that's delivering things. We've had some unwanted noise in the last few months.
The new Home Secretary, Sajid Javid, lately of the Housing Brief and now bestriding the Cabinet in one of the great offices of state. One of his first acts, to finally consign the phrase hostile environment to the dustbin.
The phrase hostile is a phrase that I'm not going to use.
But did Sajid Javid make the environment a little more hostile for the Prime Minister in a meeting of the Cabinet's Brexit Committee this week? Apparently he joined some of his most Eurosceptic colleagues to shoot down Theresa May's idea of a customs partnership with Brussels after Brexit. That would involve the UK collecting tariffs on behalf of the EU. But dozens of Tory backbenchers, headed by Jacob Rees-Mogg, flexed their muscles in a 30-page document demanding the plan be removed from the table. A not terribly subtle warning to the Prime Minister from those who believe an alliance of squeamish civil servants and gloomy Remainers is fighting a last-ditch battle to keep the UK bound to EU trade rules. But one big Brexiteer declared his utmost faith in Theresa May.
And I will be able to show her the site where a statue to the Brexit Queen will be erected.
The Lords were talking Brexit too. Peers passed an amendment that would give Parliament the final say on whether the UK could leave the EU with no deal. There were passionate interventions all round.
It is Parliament, thanks to this amendment, will have the ability to stop the train crash that is Brexit.
This House is, of course, a cosy cabal of Remain.
Back in the Commons, it was Speaker John Bercow who found himself in the spotlight. He has been accused of bullying in the past, but this week his former private secretary poured fuel on the fire.
Over-the-top anger. I'm not sure he was completely in control.
The Windrush scandal was rooted in logistical chaos, and it seems that's not confined to the Home Office. Health Secretary Jeremy Hunt revealed a computer error had caused almost 500,000 women to miss out on routine breast cancer screening.
There may be between 135 and 270 women who had their lives shortened as a result.
But by Friday, everything was background noise to the usual post-election spin machine, as the 2 largest parties sought to claim the country was swinging their way. Mind you, the next general election is not supposed to be until 2022. Surely nothing major could happen before then. So it really was quite a week in politics yet again. And that big question mark hanging over the government's Brexit policy is still with us today. That is, what type of customs arrangement with the EU the UK wants to try and negotiate. So we'll try and unpick some of that with our panel. Tom, do we know where we are? It seemed that the Brexit Committee ruled out a customs partnership, but we've had government ministers this morning seeming to put it back on the table again.
Yeah, I'm not sure the first part of your sentence is right at all. The Brexit Committee ended in permanent logjam, which is the two newest members, Sajid Javid and Gavin Williamson, horrified the Prime Minister by coming out in favour, who are, by the way, both Remain voters, came out in favour of the one she doesn't want, which is the customs arrangement, which is totally detached from the EU rather than having one small, maybe a small toe still within the customs union, which is her customs partnership. So by no means, however, did Number 10 throw that out. They said, right, we're going to come back to this. I'm told not this week, but the week after. This week they're going to talk about no deal arrangements. The week after is going to be the serious showdown. And I think we're at a massive point in British politics now. So I remember in the autumn of 2016, a very senior cabinet minister telling me that the customs union was the fault line that divided the Tory cabinet over the shape of Brexit. Quite frankly, we're still there. You know, almost 2 years on from the referendum verdict. They haven't decided this. And it does appear, because Theresa May sending out Greg Clark this morning onto the Marr show to defend the customs partnership and to make very, very Sabre-like warnings over the loss of 3,500 jobs from Toyota if we don't go down the customs partnership route. That really is Number 10 digging in. And what we also know is the Brexiteers are dug in, Boris and Liam Fox. So in the next 2 weeks, there is going to have to be a decision made, and there's going to be nothing but blood on the wall.
Melanie, it's terribly complicated what the different options are for how we might trade with the EU after we leave. It's entirely possible that many voters and even some of our viewers are absolutely clear on the precise details of it all. How much does it really matter at the end of the day what kind of customs arrangement we have?
I think it matters terribly. The customs union is being presented as a kind of nice woolly fudge to be a kind of compromise between two sides which are regarded as extreme. Either you're in the EU or you're not in the EU. The customs union is a way of keeping us in the EU by stealth. And all those voters, all those millions of British voters who voted for exiting the European Union will be looking on this with horror because they perceive, quite rightly, that this is a way of keeping us in the EU by stealth through the customs union fudge. It's not a fudge. The customs union, however much you want to dress it up, to some extent or other, keeps us within the EU rules, keeps us within the single market rules, keeps us attached to the EU in a way that the British people voted to leave.
But there's a majority in Parliament, it would appear, for keeping us in some kind of customs union or partnership. So how does the Prime Minister square this?
Absolutely. So here we have the crunch that was always going to come, because underlying the Brexit vote was the fact that you have Parliament versus the people, potentially. You have Parliament, which is stacked with Remainers, including the House of Lords, and you have the people who voted for Brexit. Now, people say, you know, the decision must rest with Parliament, but Parliament gave this decision to the British people, and if Parliament is seen to be undermining the decision that it gave to the British people, then the people's faith in Parliament will be shattered forever.
Don, from what Melanie's saying, you have to leave the customs union and not even have a partnership to respect the result of the Brexit vote. Labour say, of course, they respect the result of the referendum, but want to stay in the customs union. Can they have both?
I think the issue is that David Cameron foolishly decided to throw his entire lot in, and I think the vote was a very, very foolish thing to do in the first place. I'm a Remain voter, but I think we do have to, as Melanie and Tom said, we do have to respect the people and go with it. But I think that at the moment, David Cameron didn't say what type of Brexit we would have, and I think the majority of people did vote for Brexit. But when you look at the people who are currently linked to the EU in Northern Ireland, the majority of them didn't vote to leave the EU. So I think the customs union is a very, very good fudge for people in Northern Ireland at the moment. Arlene Foster disagreed earlier on BBC. But there are a lot of people who are very, very worried about what this means for Northern Ireland, what this means for the border there. David Davis last week visited for the first time, whereas Michel Barnier has visited a lot and raised a lot of alarm there. So I think that the customs union could be a way of actually helping the people in Northern Ireland feel as if they can have their cake and eat it.